We now are privileged to have Dr. Jeff Anderson of the Pacific. I'm sorry, folks, I don't have my glasses. Of the Pacific Research Institute, who will tell us about another aspect of Obamacare. Please, Dr. Anderson. You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. It's very good to be here today. Beautiful setting here by the ocean and everything. I'm envious of you, those of you who live around here. About 6 years ago, around the time that President Obama was first running for president, or started his run for president, I was teaching at the United States Air Force Academy, teaching political philosophy and American politics, and trying to inculcate in the cadets a love of the American founding and an appreciation of its principles and more knowledge of them. And can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Okay, thank you. But I've since left academia. In the last 4 years, I've devoted almost all of my professional time to trying to beat back the threat of Obamacare. Thanks. Unfortunately, Mitt Romney did not devote all the last 4 years to trying to beat back Obamacare, and so we are where we are. But as easy as it is to blame the Romney campaign, I think as justified as such blame is for not emphasizing Obamacare in the campaign, there is more blame to go around. Many of the best and brightest in the potential Republican field chose not to run for president. Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, the pre-Hurricane Sandy, Chris Christie, Mitch Daniels, Sarah Palin. None of them jumped into the fray, and I think we also have a primary process that encourages such people often to sit it out and not jump into the fray. And in addition, the Republican Party as a whole has done precious little on health care in the last 15 years or so. I mean, once Hillary Care was beaten back in the first term of the Clinton administration, Republicans just sort of sat back and did not address the concerns about our healthcare system that the American people wanted to see addressed. And so it created a situation that was very fertile ground for President Obama to come in and ultimately ram Obamacare through. 5 days before he was elected, Barack Obama said, quote, "We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America." And he meant it. And the main vehicle, if he succeeds in keeping it on the books, will be Obamacare. Obama also, a couple years before that, in The Audacity of Hope, published in 2006, so not exactly a long time ago, he said, quote, "Implicit in the very idea of ordered liberty is a rejection of absolute truth." But that contrasts quite vividly with the Declaration of Independence, of course, which says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Charles Kessler, in his wonderful book, I Am the Change, writes, "Our own absolute truths, those words ought to send a shudder down Americans' constitutional spine." Elsewhere in I Am the Change, Kessler's book, he writes, "The more one ponders Obama's electoral policy and longer political agenda, the more the health care bill stands out as the centerpiece of the whole enterprise. Stop it, and you have a good chance of stopping the transformation he seeks. Fail, or worse, don't even try, and you permit what can be called, without exaggeration, gradual regime change at home. For the health care question involves nothing less than the form of government and the habits and character of the American people." So Obama now, as of this summer, said, quote, "The law I passed," note the first person, "is here to stay." So is this really true? Do we meet here today fated to accept Obamacare through forevermore? I share your optimism. I think I think the battle over Obamacare is actually, as long as it may seem to, like it's been going on, it is really very much in the middle of the run. I think the next 4 or 5 years will determine the fate of Obamacare. Yeah, Obama's in this for the long haul, and I think we need to be in it for that as well and show the same sort of determination to beat this back that he has shown in imposing it. I think, ultimately the 2016 presidential election is going to prove pivotal in this fight, but there's been recent developments that I think are encouraging in the aftermath of the election. And chief among those is the refusal of 17 states at this point, including South Carolina under Governor Nikki Haley, the refusal of those states to implement the Obamacare exchanges, to establish state-based Obamacare exchanges. The exchanges are under Obamacare, people would get insurance one of two ways. They'd either be dumped into Medicaid, a taxpayer expense, or they would purchase health care through these taxpayer-financed exchanges at extraordinary taxpayer expense, and they would have to purchase government-approved health care. So 17 states, about a third of all states, have refused to set up these state-based exchanges, which I think is something of a surprise for the Obama administration. It makes it a lot harder for them to get going with this. Obamacare is set to go into effect about a year from now, but with so many states refusing to comply, and only about a third have said they will set up state-based exchanges. The other third are kind of in limbo in one way or another. The federal exchanges, which are the alternative, are problematic on multiple levels for the administration. They're behind in setting them up. Congress has not allocated funding for the federal exchanges. Now, this administration is very good at taking money from one place and diverting it to another, and not necessarily always in a lawful fashion, but nevertheless, it's a pretty big deal that Congress has not allocated money. And furthermore, the plain language of Obamacare, it was so sloppily and hurriedly written, says that no money can go to people through the federal exchange. No taxpayer subsidies can operate through the federal exchange. So that's being challenged in the courts. And so for all these reasons, this is an encouraging development in regard to the exchanges, which are really maybe the key element of Obamacare and how it works. Even more encouraging, though, I think, in the grander scheme of things, is how much the American people still don't like Obamacare. This last election was a victory for President Obama, but it was not a victory for Obamacare. And I think that was painfully clear in a number of ways. I mean, it was never challenged as an election based on Obamacare. I don't think the American people went into the voting booth thinking they were voting as if it were a referendum on Obamacare. They were told repeatedly, this is just about the economy. And they ultimately decided that Bill Clinton's argument was convincing, that no one could have turned this economy around in just 4 years. So exit polling the day of Obama's victory showed that more voters opposed Obamacare than favored it. That's exit polling actually there at the site of the election. CNN, in a post-election poll, showed Americans, registered voters, against Obamacare by a margin of 10 points after the election, and independents against it by 22 points. So the center of America, the independents, are very much against this legislation. And we can look back to 2010. It's so easy to forget, but in 2010, Republicans ran clearly against Obamacare, and they won overwhelmingly. They won more House seats in 2010 than they had won in any election since Gone with the Wind was released. And that's an unusual degree of success. And somehow Republicans forgot that formula in 2012, and a lot of that had to do with the candidate selection. But nevertheless, Americans, I think you get the gist of my point, Americans do not like Obamacare. In between the 2010 election, incidentally, and the 2012 election, Rasmussen ran 84 polls asking Americans if they wanted repeal or not, if they favored repeal of Obamacare. In all 84, they said yes. And the closest it ever was 5 percentage points, as large as 29 percentage points. So American people are still on our side on this. And it's not surprising why, when you think about all that the cost to our liberty, most prominently, but also our economy, our health care, that Obamacare would, all the damage it would cause. At a time, just to take you through kind of a quick list of, once again, refresh our memories of exactly why Obamacare is so bad. At a time when our country is already more than $16 trillion in debt, as you know, Obamacare would increase federal spending by about $2 trillion over the next decade. To partly cover this spending binge, it would impose 20 new or higher taxes, fees, or fines, totaling about $1 trillion. It would raise annual health care premiums by thousands of dollars per family for policies purchased on the open market. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office. It would raise annual health care it would siphon over $700 billion out of Medicare and spend it on Obamacare. It would cut Medicare reimbursement rates to the point where Medicare providers would be paid less than Medicaid providers by the end of this decade, according to the Medicare chief actuary. It would establish the Independent Payment Advisory Board, the IPAB, empowered to cut payments to Medicare providers even further. The decrees of this unelected and largely unaccountable board of 15 bureaucrats would not be reversible by a simple majority vote in Congress, our Constitution's vesting of the legislative power in Congress notwithstanding. Obamacare would cause millions of Americans with employer-provided health insurance to lose their insurance. The CBO guesses about 5 million. It would cause millions of seniors to lose their Medicare Advantage plans. It would dump more than a third of the newly insured into the already subpar Medicaid system. And it would give all kinds of incentives for employers to dump their employees into Obamacare's exchanges at huge cost to taxpayers. It would, the perverse incentives for employers are amazing. With the Obamacare, as you may have heard, defines full-time work as 30 hours a week and says that if you have at least 50 employees, you have to provide health care. So it's not hard to predict that businesses will try to stay below 50 employees, and those employees that they have, they'll try to keep to a 29-hour work week. In addition to all this, Obamacare would almost surely make catastrophic health care plans illegal. We await the decrees from the Secretary of Health and Human Services to confirm that, but that seems rather clear. It would impose regulations so onerous that the IRS estimates it will take Americans 79 million man-hours a year to comply with them, with over half of that burden falling on small businesses. That's the IRS's own estimate. It would provide taxpayer funding of abortion and has already made it illegal to choose a health care plan that even so much as charges copays for contraception, sterilization, or the abortion drug Ella. So for all these reasons, it's not surprising the American people would rather go in another direction and get rid of this monstrosity. So how do we get there? What's the key to beating back Obamacare at this point? I think there are two keys. One, in the shorter term, I think it's important, is that we need to push Congress to delay implementation of Obamacare. If there's anything that Congress should be pushing for in the upcoming budget negotiations over the next year, I think it should be this. By delaying implementation of Obamacare, even a year, it would be scored as saving a couple $100 billion over 10 years, as it would move that last year out of the 10-year window, out of the budgetary window. So it's substantial savings. More importantly, from a political standpoint, it would move the onset of Obamacare closer to the 2016 election and make it more likely that it would continue to be an issue that would motivate voters as they see their health care premiums inevitably rise when it goes into effect. So I would encourage any of you to, if you feel so inclined, to push your congressional representatives to try to include that in any negotiations as a very prominent and important thing, to delay the implementation of Obamacare, even by a year, even 6 months. And the administration, on some level, might halfway be willing to do so because they're so far behind in all the work they have to do. Although it would be a challenging fight, to be sure. The even bigger key, though, I think, is for all of us who so strongly oppose Obamacare to be able to unite behind and back candidates who are willing to offer a replacement for Obamacare. I mean, that I think is the real key in all this at this point, is to have a replacement. And Bob Moffett, who comes next, and Jim Capretta have written some wonderful things on this, as have other people. When I was on my way down here, I was driving in the D.C. area where I live. Don't worry, my wife and I live slightly outside the Beltway, so we haven't been corrupted. But I saw a bumper sticker that said, 45 million people without health insurance is a moral outrage. Now, it was good to come down here to South Carolina, a good red state, where there's probably not as many of those bumper stickers. But I think it's an indication of two things. One, an indication of the importance to so many people of dealing with the problem of however many million people there are that are uninsured. And it's a reminder that that's going to be even more important in 2016, because by then, Obamacare will have gone into effect, and it's going to be considered to be far more of a moral outrage to pull all these people off of the insurance that they got. And we're going to have an answer. We're going to have an answer for what are we going to do with these folks to make sure that they don't just go back to being uninsured. I think the answer is mostly twofold. The main thing we need to do is fix the unfairness in the tax code. By and large, a lot of the problems with our healthcare system are as not surprisingly, a creation of the federal government. As many of you may know, this is a longer story, but the short version is in World War II and around World War II, the federal government decided to make employer-provided health insurance tax deductible. And it tax exempt. It did not. It gave a tax break for employers to provide health insurance to their employees. The predictable result was that people get insurance almost exclusive. Well, most people get it through their employer, and it helped to sever the relationship, the natural relationship between sever the situation where the patient and the payer used to be one and the same. Now they're two different entities most of the time. There's not much incentive or opportunity to shop for value or control costs when the patient is one person and the payer is another. But another offshoot of this was that those who don't get insurance through their employer are left in this market, in this individual healthcare market, which has been sapped of its vibrancy because so many people get their insurance through their employer, and they don't get the same tax break, which is just fundamentally unfair. I mean, why should the uninsured, if they go out to shop for insurance, not get a tax break when everybody who gets insurance through their employer does? And the easiest way to fix this would be to issue, as again, Dr. Moffitt and Capretta and others have argued, I've argued in the past, to give tax credits in the amount of probably something around $2,000 a person, $5,000 a family, to those who do not get health insurance through their employer. And these tax credits would be solely for purchasing health insurance, couldn't be used for anything else. And with those, it would more or less equalize the treatment in the tax code and make it so much more affordable for people to be able to buy health insurance. This would address the problem for the vast majority of the uninsured. For the specific case, this is the second point, of those with prohibitively expensive pre-existing conditions, we hear about them so often. This is a relatively small portion of the population we're talking about, much smaller than is often suggested. But for this group, it's important to do a couple of other things, and just quickly, I think that the main things are to guarantee that if people do have health insurance and they shift to another job or they leave their job and they buy insurance individually, change the laws to where they can do that without taking a hit for having a pre-existing condition. If they were insured before, they should be able to maintain insurance and shift it into a new plan without paying a huge premium as a result of declining health. And perhaps you'd have a one-time chance for people who didn't have insurance to enter that market. But that would be a one-time shot and not something that would continue perpetually. And that would take some federal funding for what are often called state-run high-risk pools to be able to fund this. Now, both of these are suggestions that I'm sure any of us could raise some philosophical objections to, sort of in a vacuum. But I think if we had the combination of those two things, fix the unfairness in the tax code by giving tax credits to the uninsured and the self-insured, and change it to where people are guaranteed that if they have insurance, they can keep it over time and have some federal funding to help make that possible. I think we'd have the answer the American people are looking for. I want to close with a related notion. The question of two things, principle and prudence, that are two things that it's not possible to have too much of. You can never have enough adherence to principle, and you can never be too prudent, or prudence is practical wisdom, of course. And this is something to me that the founders really exemplify, that they were both very prudent and very principled, and they knew that the two went together, that you can only hope to advance your principles if you are prudent in doing so. And I want to give an example of that. When at the Constitutional Convention, the large states hated the thought of equal state representation in the Senate. And James Madison and George Washington, part of the extraordinary Virginia delegation at the Constitutional Convention, Madison in particular argued that how can you justify Virginia not getting more senators than Rhode Island when Virginia has 16 times as many people? But they didn't have the votes, and they lost that battle. And the Senate was going to be equal state representation. And when that became obvious and inevitable, Virginia and the other large states seriously considered walking out of the Constitutional Convention and saying, this just isn't right. A vote in Virginia shouldn't count 1/16 as much as a vote in Rhode Island. And they thought about leaving. But being the prudent men that they were, they realized that what they were there to do was implement a constitution that would help to bring forth the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And it says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not the right to life, liberty, and to avoid equal state representation in the Senate. Sometimes you have to give a little bit, even on key points like that one, to make the greater thing come about like they did with the Constitution. And thankfully, they did, and that's where we are today. And Obamacare is a fundamental threat to our Constitution, to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and I think that at times, Republicans have been reluctant to embrace ideas like the tax credits and some of this legislation to help make sure that people avoid being uninsured. It's short-sighted in my view because the far greater battle is beating back Obamacare. We've got to beat this thing, and we have to have a replacement to be able to beat it. So just to conclude here, I think we need to pick our battles, and we need to fight hard and smart, and Obamacare is something worth battling with all we have. The key to winning that battle is to advance its replacement. Republican office holders and all other opponents of Obamacare need to be appraised and judged in large part by how well they can articulate a replacement for Obamacare and by how persuasively they can present that replacement to the American people. And that will be particularly true for whoever the Republican nominee is in 2016. Thank you.